in our what do you got? Merlot, Pinot Noir, Cab?
A Cab.
Hey everybody, welcome to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here coming at you with a remastered Listography this week. We are doing R.E.M. So for anybody new to the channel, what remastered means is that back in the day before Kram and Joe joined me on the channel, I was doing lists on my own. And so when we revisit the lists that I did prior, we call it remastered. So I have ranked R.E.M. before. Today, all three of us are, and we've done a few other remasters. We've done Zeppelin, and who else have we done?
Radiohead, Beatles.
The Cars. I will say, I think this list of the remasters that we've done so far is the biggest shakeup for my list that I've seen so far. A lot of changes, things bouncing around, and some things moving fairly significantly.
You think that's because of going through albums of the year, kind of changed your perspective a little bit?
I don't know what it was, really. It could be that a little bit. People weren't happy with my initial list. I don't think they're going to be happy with this list, but I think they'll have different issues.
How long ago was the first one, Jason?
I don't know, at least probably 2 years ago.
Okay. So, I mean, 2 years, in 2 years, my taste for all of these bands could be completely different. So I'm not surprised it's changed significantly.
Unlike you two goofballs, I'm pretty, I have found myself and I know who I am. So my lists almost never change. So
that's the case for me usually. I think my lists typically don't change. Some of the remasters that we've done, I didn't change at all. I think because I did it by myself, there's a perception among our regular viewers that I'm a big R.E.M. fan, but not necessarily true. I like R.E.M. I think they're good, but they're not one of my all-time favorite bands. And I think that showed during albums of the year. The only one that cracked my top 5 was Green. So
then there's me, who nobody knows what I think about R.E.M.
We know. Obviously, I have to defend my R.E.M. fandom. They're probably a top 20, top 30 artist for me ever. But they were like the heartbreak number 6, number 7 of a lot of years. They did win in 1988, my album of the year for Green. And spoiler alert, that's not even my favorite R.E.M. album. So it was really just kind of like conditionally losing the competition by a little. But in the long run, R.E.M. is a top-notch artist for me, one of the best ever. I've know all of these albums pretty much inside and out, except the last one I only ever listened to once and then did again this week. So, but everything else I know pretty well.
And I guess it's safe to assume then that I know all of them. I've ranked them before and I've listened to them numerous times, but we don't know Joe's experience with R.E.M. How much of the catalog did you know?
I knew some, but I was by no means a completionist when it comes to them. A long time ago, I can't remember when, maybe like 2004 or 3, I heard a song on the radio that I really liked from R.E.M. And I was like, okay, well, I must like R.E.M. So I started listening to some of their albums. Didn't really get me, you know, I liked the singles, but all the albums I listened to didn't care for that much. They were okay. And R.E.M's just never been a band that like gripped me. I don't know why exactly, because I like all of the aspects that they bring to the table. I like the sound pretty much throughout their whole career, from the college rock, jangly stuff to the pop stuff to the alternative stuff and everything else. So it's weird. It just never quite clicked for me with R.E.M. I like them and I appreciate them, but this time is a little different. So I'm not going to spoil it, but I came around to some stuff. So we'll see how I rank them, but they're a great band. I can't say they're not a great all-time band. They're just not like my band.
So let's start ranking them. Who wants to start?
Why don't you start this one, since we already know where your lists have been?
All right. So first time I did the list, the biggest issue I think people had was the record that I had at the bottom, which was Monster. And even then, the first time I did it, it was neck and neck at the bottom with my number 14. And they were kind of duking it out again at the bottom. but I did flip them. My number 15 now is New Adventures in Hi-Fi. Still got Scott Litt producing. This is the last one with Bill Berry. A lot of R.E.M. fans seem to consider this like among their best, like maybe top 5 for a lot of hardcore R.E.M. fans. I just don't hear it. They sound tired. They sound out of ideas. They don't do anything on this record that I don't think they do better elsewhere. I think the best track on it is Electrolyte, which is the last song. It's over an hour into the record. It's way too long, a 65-minute long record. It's okay. I probably would give it like a 2.5 stars. I don't think any of their records are terrible, but for me, I think they've got much better.
I do think an album of theirs is terrible, and that album is Up. As we all know, this is my number 15. I mentioned it. I asked Jason, how could you like this album in the group chat? And I just think it's pretty terrible. I think it might have the worst opening track ever for an album with Airport Man. Totally just destroys any want for me to listen to the rest of it. Lotus is a little hokey. I hate the vocal effects. There's just too much of that. There's too much little added electronic bits, little, not bleeps and bloops so much, but just they're trying too much. It sounds really super late 90s, like to the day you could pinpoint when it was made. And it just loses me right from the beginning with those first 4 tracks. I will say At My Most Beautiful is awesome. A shining diamond in a sea of turds, and totally comes out of the blue because you don't expect that in this album. But Day Sleeper's okay. Everything else is a mess. I just really hated this album. I don't think it's just because Bill Berry left. I don't think he's that important, but I just didn't like this one at all. So it's like a 1.5. I'll say 1.5 stars. It gets a little bonus for At My Most Beautiful because that's a really good track, but that's about it for me.
Did you say you didn't think Bill Berry was that important to the group?
Well, I mean, I like the albums after this much more than this. So just because he left doesn't mean they weren't capable of producing a good album. I do think he's important, and I much like the early stuff, and I think he's a great drummer, and his backup vocals are great, and songwriting. But losing him shouldn't make R.E.M. that bad as this album is for me.
I believe that they actually had a lot of the groundwork to that album laid out before he retired. So yeah, I think a lot of people tend to blame that album on his departure, but it's not really. So my number 15, and I will preface this by saying this is the only album I don't think is good or really good or great or really great or amazing. I'm going 2.5 stars, which means it's decent. For the last one they ever did, Collapse Into Now, I think it's decent. It just sounds like almost exactly what Jason said about New Adventures in Hi-Fi, I think applies to this. They sound tired, out of gas, out of new ideas. It sounds like every album kind of has like a distinctive sound or approach, something they wanted to fix on the last album or, whatever it is. And this one just sounds like a big morphed generic R.E.M. album a little bit. It does have some nice energy. It's not like lifeless. It picks up a little bit where Accelerate left off, a little more subdued. I do think of the post-up stuff, this does probably have the best drumming on it, but kind of forgettable songs and not clearly, like Jason said, everything else they do on this album, they do much better elsewhere in the catalog. So yeah, that's my number 15, and the only one I don't think is good, the only one I don't think everyone should go out and listen to, Collapse Into Now.
I have both of your bottom albums in my top 5.
Cancel the recording. No, we can't. That can't happen.
But my number 14, as I already alluded to, is Monster. I think I gave it the slight edge this time over New Adventures because I do really like some of the singles. I like What's the Frequency, Kenneth, Crush with Eyeliner, Strange Currencies is pretty cool. But the rest of the album, I just do not like at all. King of Comedy, I Took Your Name, Star 69, You, Circus Envy. I think those are among the worst songs they've ever done. I don't think Peter Buck is really that good at distorted alternative rock guitars. He's a master of like the jangly, arpeggiated layering of guitars, but his tone on this record sucks. It is really bad. It's hard to listen to. It's harsh. I find myself wanting to like keep turning it down because it just is painful on the ears, and I do not like really listening to it. Even the mix on it is really bad. The songs that I do like What's the Frequency, Kenneth, I think sound terrible. So yeah, number 14 for me, Monster.
My 14 is going to be Around the Sun. It is extremely forgettable. It's not bad. It's not like Up, the 2-star record. I didn't hear R.E.M. on this. I heard the generic 90s, early 2000s band. It's just, I don't know, there's something missing. They still have some of those electronic textures that they were dabbling in, some drum beats that sound way too much like U2, and Q-Tip's appearance completely unnecessary. I get it with KRS-One on Radio Song, but now they're just trying to like bring back old glory, and it just bored me. Nothing on here I would recommend. This is pretty much what the critics think is the worst one. I'm kind of with them on this one. It just doesn't, there's no magic here. There's nothing great to kind of latch onto. So easy number 14 for me, Around the Sun.
Not just the critics, but the band themselves don't really care about this album very much. It's also my number 14. I like the first part of the album a good bit. You know, I'd probably say the best songs on the album were Electron Blue and The Outsiders. It does have way too much of the electronica sonic nature for an R.E.M. album. It's just them going too much in that direction. Even though they do it a lot on Up, which I like a lot more, the kind of the approach to that album fit that style. This one, you know, the songs are kind of their standard fare a little bit with this kind of just glaze on top. I still like it. You know, I think it suffers after a good start on the album, really tapers off. Aftermath is good toward the middle end, but it is a little bit soulless. You can kind of feel the passion just kind of squeezed out of them, and that plus like that studio shine they've gone on, it makes it feel like maybe their most superficial, just kind of like bland kind of approach. But even on their off day, such good songwriters and very good players, so I still think it's a good album. I can listen to it. It's just not, you know, it doesn't have their best or most memorable songs. So number 14, Around the Sun.
I'm right here with you. At number 13, I've got Around the Sun. It's an okay record. Not great. Like you guys said, pretty generic. I don't really like the production much. It kind of veers dangerously close to like The Calling or whatever other kind of like really mainstream pop rock stuff was happening around the time. And I think this record might have some of the worst melody writing from Michael Stipe. He does a lot of like speak singing on this record, just not a lot of hooks. But there are some good songs. Leaving New York's pretty good. I like Aftermath. Ascent of Man is kind of cool. It's just kind of mediocre the whole way through. And I agree with the Q-Tip thing. Doesn't fit in. I don't think KRS-One works either on Radio Song, but we will get to that later.
Well, I'm glad we all agree at least on one thing. And I'm kind of with Jason on New Adventures in Hi-Fi as well. That is my number 13. Yeah, I was kind of surprised that people hold this so highly. It just seems, I don't know, really like mid-90s-y. When I hear it, I think of like Elderly Woman in a Small Town by Pearl Jam a lot. Like even the guitar tones sometimes sound like Pearl Jam stuff. I don't know why, but it's too long. I like some of the songs. I think How the West Is One Way or Goddess is good. I think The Wake Up Bomb is good. New Test Leper is pretty good. But then the second half, Until Electrolyte, it just drags. It's really long. I don't like Zither at all. And it just seems like, I don't know, it seems like there's just too much meandering, not enough hooks, not enough, pop songs, melodies, really good stuff. So it's just kind of anonymous to me. I didn't find that hook for me. So I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but maybe I'm not, because Jason also seems to feel the same way. So yeah, New Adventures in Hi-Fi, number 13 for me.
Fun fact about Electrolyte, it is Tom York's favorite R.E.M. song, and R.E.M. is one of Tom York's favorite bands. My number 13 is Accelerate. I think this is considerably better than Around the Sun. And I know critics really loved it and said it was like a return to form, and it is. But I never really thought R.E.M. was a return to form kind of band, which is why I kind of read this as a bit of like a really safe, cautious move for them. I do think it's good. You know, it's pretty aggressive, raw, guitar driven. Maybe it is a little bit too much like that. I think it might need to slow down a little some. I think a lot of the, you know, the best of Michael Stipe and songwriting gets lost. Sometimes it's a bit too perky for me. It's fun and less serious. It kind of feels like they're kind of just like an old garage rock band again. And it's got one of my least favorite songs, which is Supernatural, super serious. But I do like, you know, I like R.E.M. a lot. So even these songs that I'm finding criticisms with, I still like them. I just think that, you know, in this era of R.E.M., I am personally like waiting for like this breakout artistic masterpiece. I never really get, which is why I'm in the middle ground between you guys on Up, is because it is kind of like a big different artistic statement for them. But then after that, you know, everything, you know, especially this album, even though I think it's good and a good listen, it is their safe return to form album. And I don't think that's something that they really should be doing, but I still like it. Number 13, Accelerate.
Accelerate is my number 12. And I agree largely with what Cram said. It's this kind of like back to basics rock record. And it is really nice to have them sounding energized again. These songs are like really kind of like balls to the wall, faster, more energy, which is really, I think, necessary after Around the Sun. But I think they kind of just charged through it with too much energy, and there's not enough finesse and not enough good songwriting. Mr. Richards for me is easily the best song on the record, but not a lot else really sticks. So even though it's kind of like nice to hear them in this vein again, it's just not that substantial. It just kind of comes in one ear and out the other, most of it.
My number 12, Accelerate. We're all on the same page again. Although I think when I was listening to this, when I got through the first couple tracks, I was like, wow, this is going to be like a top 5 record for me. I love the way it starts with Living Well and The Best Revenge, Man Size Re, Supernatural, Super Serious, and Hollow Man. I love the sort of sound. The bass is like really prominent in the mix. It's loud and aggressive. They kind of just like are rocking out, and I like it. And then it kind of just falls apart after that. Don't really like anything much after that. A little too much fluff. Until the Day Is Done. Like I like the stripped down sound on that one, but after Hollow Man, nothing grabbed me. They kind of lose that balls to the wallness that made me like the first 4 tracks so much. And so it's just an okay album for me, but it starts off great. So listen to the first 4 songs and then hits the rest into the sea.
My number 12 is going to be Reveal. Jason said, I think about Around the Sun, that it's starting to sound a little bit like they're conforming to the pop rock around them, like The Calling, or I kind of get those vibes on this album a lot, where the songs are like really predictable, have like kind of a lot of like common pop rock, big hit kind of song structure to them. I do like some of that on here. The Lifting, I've Been High. I don't like She Just Wants to Be. Saturn Return, don't really care for. There's some good songs, no doubt, but I think overall it's a little bit like overly emotional and a little bit oversweet, a little bit far reaching into like, it's almost like they're like Britpop album at times, if that makes sense. Like it's just got like this really hard on the sleeve, but it's like not the hearts we're used to from R.E.M. And it's a little, I think a lot of it, I guess, is kind of a little corny and sappy for them at times, but songwriting's still pretty strong, even if it is a little bit blended in with the other kind of generic stuff going on around them. So that is my number 12, Reveal.
Now we get into the maybe controversy to some people, but also probably I think the biggest change from my first list to this one. It was my number 4, and now it has fallen all the way down to number 11. I have the debut album, Murmur, and there's really no reason that it's down here except for I like all the other ones more. I think this is a good record, but it is their debut, and I think they grew a lot from here with each record. It kind of is a new sound. No one really sounded like them, even though it kind of sounds like a lot of other things. You can hear certain influences in it for sure. But I think maybe a little bit too much praise does get heaped on it for being first, because I think they grew as songwriters with each record after this. And I think the engineering and production got better as well. So it's kind of a process of elimination, why it ended up down here at 11. I just think the other ones are better.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. I don't know how R.E.M. fans view these lists at all. I am not like dialed into the REM fandom world. So I can see that being down here. I don't know about that low. It seems a little weird considering some of the song albums we still have to get to. But my number 11 is going to be Monster. And I agree some parts with Jason about the sound. Although I don't think the tone is bad. I just think the effects, the delay on What's the Frequency, Kenneth, kind of annoying and unnecessary. I don't mind the crunchiness and the alternative-iness. I don't think it's out of place for them. I don't think it's too far apart from what they've done. I think it's sort of a natural progression. They wanted to get a little louder, a little more alternative-y. And I think the songwriting is good enough. I mean, What's the Frequency, Kennedy is a great song. I think Bang and Blame, Star 69, Crush with Eyeliner, all good songs. I think Strange Currencies is really strong, very stripped down, like 60s style rock ballad. And maybe they could have done a little more of that, I think, on this album would have been nice. I don't have a lot to complain about. I'm not like in love with the album, but it's a solid album. I don't think it is deserving of a bottom spot. Certainly not.
Definitely not. My number 11 is Up. I know this isn't Joe's style, so I'm not surprised that he has it at the bottom, but it's much better than that. Doesn't have any rock on it, really. Sounds more like a, early 2000s, like Belle and Sebastian or like Yola Tango album with these kind of simmering, dreamy electronic pop tunes, a lot of synth, drum loops. Gets you like that sensation like you're floating in like a giant fishbowl. It's very curious and subdued. Nothing ferocious or intense about it. You don't have like the big heartfelt Michael Stipe on it. So it's a very, very different artistic approach from them that they don't really do much on anything else. It really sticks out. It tiptoes around a lot of the emotion and of the album and a lot of the drama. It doesn't come across as much, but I think Airport Man is great. I love My Most Beautiful, You're in the Air. I think there's a lot of good stuff on this album and it doesn't get enough credit. So my number 11 is Up.
Right. My number 10 is Document. This is the first one with Scott Litt producing, and immediately you just know they've got a big producer on board because the drums are massive. And I think at some points, the biggest problem for me with this record is the production. It just like completely overpowers moments on this record. Still think some of the songs are really good. I love Exhuming McCarthy, Disturbance at Heron House, The One I Love. But other tracks like Lightning Hopkins just doesn't work at all. I don't know. It's got its moments and songs that I really like. I don't know, feel like the production is just a little ham-fisted at times. Wish they would iron out on their next record.
That's got to be another controversial one, right? I mean, I can't imagine an R.E.M. fan putting it that low. But that's where our commenters are going to come in, because I feel like there's a lot of big R.E.M. fans already on our board. So it'll be good to have Jason take all the heat off of me. Much obliged. My number 10 is going to be Collapse Into Now, their last one. I think it's a real good album. Definitely kind of reaching back into the 80s sound. A lot janglier. You got some mandolin, some horns. And, I don't think they've lost the plot. I don't think they're out of ideas. I think they know they're breaking up at this point. And it kind of feels like an epitaph to their career. I like the guest spots from Eddie Vedder and Peaches. I think they all hit their mark pretty well. I don't think anything sounds forced. And I think the songs are all pretty good. What is it? Alligator, Aviator, Autopilot, Antimatter is a good one. That Someone Is You, Discoverer, all good. And I like the ballads plenty as well. It's a good album. It feels like a whole kind of complete artistic statement. They're going out on it, and I think it's an improvement over Accelerate and Around the Sun, and a nice way to cap off their career.
All right, my number 10. We are in 3.5, almost 4-star territory. So I think all of these albums are really good to great to masterpieces. I've got Out of Time at number 10, which is the hardest one for me to place because I think if you just look at like a batch of songs, it's one of their better, it's probably much better than number 10. But this album suffers from a really unusual flow for me to listen to from start to finish. It is like, if we ever do a specialty video about albums that need resequence, this might be like maybe the number one for me. I feel like Radio Song is number one just to counteract Green's first song, pop song, 89. And like, then it goes into Losing My Religion, which is the emotional peak of the album and also your biggest hit. Then it goes to Low. And then right like Near Wild in Heaven is really nice. And you're like, all right, we're starting to find our footing a little bit. And then you get the instrumental Endgame. Then you get Shiny Happy People, which is really quirky. And by now we're halfway through the album and like, I like it, but I don't really know how to feel. It's very disjointing. And then at the end you get like really heavy folk country stuff with Texarkana and country feedback. And I like all of these songs, but it's like, you know, the sum of its parts is less than these individual tracks. It's really bizarre. I think the songs are great, but it's only a really good album, and mainly because of this, just the way they sequence it. It just really, I've never listened to it all the way through and just been like, this is one of the great albums. But you know, a lot of these tracks are must hear R.E.M. tracks. I like the direction. They're kind of turning up the folk country a little bit. I think Stipe sounds great. Yeah, just that's like, it's a lot of really good songs with like a major problem in its packaging. I'm not betraying R.E.M. I have to critique all these albums. I think this is a great album, but yeah, it's such a weird problem for me. I might be the only one that hears it that way, but that's how I feel. Out of Time, number 10.
Out of Time is my number 9, and I have almost the exact same notes written. It is one of the most disjointed records ever made, but I don't think a simple resequencing will fix it. I don't think a lot of these songs even belong on the same record. They just are so all over the place. They totally stumble out of the gate with Radio Song, which is among their worst songs ever, I think. KRS-One doesn't belong on it at all. I'm not a hip hop fan, so I have that bias, but there is no sort of continuity or reason for KRS-One to be on an R.E.M. track. Makes no sense. And then to go from that into Losing My Religion is so bizarre. Yeah, I don't know. It has some great songs on it. Like half of this record is amazing, and then the other half just is either not that interesting or just doesn't work in the context of the other tracks, or I don't know. It's a half of a great album and half just sort of them kind of going through growing pains, I think. I see this kind of as a bridge between Green and Automatic for the People. But it's interesting that so many people think so highly of it because Losing My Religion was just a massive, like, generation-defining song. So I'm sure it holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts, but as a full listening experience, it is really weird.
I totally agree with you guys, but it's higher on my list because the songs are great. But yeah, it is bizarre. My number 9 is going to be Reveal. This might be the first R.E.M. album I actually ever heard. I actually heard it in 2001 when it came out. And I liked Imitation of Life. It was on the radio a little bit. And all the way to Reno was probably in commercials or something, but I heard it back then as well. So I don't think I ever bought the album, but I definitely listened to it. And I think it's a solid album. It's, Kramzer said that Stipe was friends with Tom York, and you can kind of feel the European sort of electronic influence. It's not overwhelming. Doesn't kind of ruin it like it does for me on Up and Around the Sun. But there's definitely sort of a different flavor, different sound to it. I like it. I think all the songs are good, but I really like the Beach Boys-esque Summer Turns to High, Beach Ball, and Beat a Drum, which were purposely written as kind of an homage to the Beach Boys. I think they're all excellent. You can all hear the Beach Boys influence, but it's not like too much, too obvious. Just good songs using some of the flavor of the Beach Boys. I don't think it has like a killer single, so it's at number 9, but it's a good, 3.5 to 4 star kind of album. So yeah, number 9, Reveal. Now I think at this point we're past all of the later albums from them, so now we're kind of getting into the meat of R.E.M. the classics.
I'm surprised you would go that high with your star ratings in the 9 to 10 spot for R.E.M, but maybe you like them more than you're willing to admit. All right, so we're into 9. I think all of these albums are great. So no matter what I have here, someone's going to get upset and be like, you're crazy. But like, I love all this. So this is tough. But my number 9 is going to be Life's Rich Pageant. It's great. It's louder, it's more radio friendly than the stuff leading up. You got the backing vocals turned up a good bit here, and it's kind of straight up hard rock, a lot of like those dance beats and like kind of like really groovy, not groovy bass lines, but you know, really foot tapping bass lines are kind of gone by now. The playing isn't quite as free as I thought it was leading up in the albums up to this, and the main thing is like I feel like they know what they want to do and they just kind of fall short. They don't like go all in. And I think they will on Document in a big way. So I feel like this one is just like a little bit apprehensive for what their real vision is. And just simply put, the songs are all really good. The album is really good. They're just kind of missing those standout all-time great R.E.M tracks, you know, like that you have to see live or would make like a top 25. You know, I don't have anything on my top 10 songs from this album, or even really considered Cuyahoga probably my favorite, but you know, all of them are really good songs, just not, you know, they're competing with other great albums and great songs. So this is a great album, and it's Life's Rich Pageant at number 9.
All right, my number 8, this is one, I forget exactly where I had it, but I think this one has moved up a little bit since my initial list. I've got Reckoning at number 8. It's pretty much a continuation of what they were doing on Murmur, but it's just a little bit better all around, better recorded, better sounded, a little bit more layering of the instruments going on here. I think the songwriting's better, but still they get better from here. So it lands at 8. It's kind of like Murmur Part 2.
My number 8 is going to be Life's Rich Pageant, Life's without an apostrophe. Does anyone know why R.E.M did that all the time? They left out those little punctuation marks all the time on a bunch of different stuff. It's throughout like all of their albums. They'll just like leave out a comma or it's odd. I don't know why they did it. Someone can tell us in the comments. Getting back to Life's Rich Pageant, I agree with Cram. It's like halfway between college rock and like the radio conquering pop gods that they would soon become. And the songs are like stuck in the middle. They're not quite catchy enough and friendly enough for like big radio play, but they're not quite the jangly kind of fun college rock, raw indie sound that they had going on their first couple albums. So it's just kind of stuck in the middle. Nothing on this album, like I'm totally with Cramser. Nothing on here is going to make my top 10, probably not top 20 songs. I think they're all good, but there's just not enough great for me. So it's a 3.5, but it's definitely my least favorite of their 80s work.
All right. My number 8, potentially controversial, but you know, we could have potential controversy with all these, is going to be New Adventures in Hi-Fi. I'm with you guys that there is a big group of R.E.M fanatics that insist this is one of on like their Mount Rushmore, maybe a top 3 or even top 2 album. And I think that's because everything kind of like sound and style wise builds up to this, where you get just like an eclectic array of all of their stuff. It's kind of got like their mainstream pop writing appeal mixed with like a little bit of the college rock stuff, and they're kind of experimenting with a little bit of new stuff, and it's a great album. Why I don't have it higher is it has an unusual higher number of kind of past like skippable songs for me on this, maybe just because it is so long. Maybe if they just trimmed it, it would help out a lot for me. So there are songs on here that I love, like all-time great R.E.M songs, you know, like Electrolyte, and you know, I really just kind of like a lot of the weirder stuff. I like Ebo the Letter a lot. I like Leave. I like Be Mine. But there are just like a bunch of tracks that kind of come like every few songs where it just kind of takes me out of it. You know, I know a lot of R.E.M fans feel very different. Yeah, I think it's just missing a little bit of just overall completion to just great songs. So it is my number 8, New Adventures in Hi-Fi. And you know what? It's a bit like thin and flat and hollow sounding. I don't think it sounds as good as a lot of the other albums. That kind of hurts it a little bit.
My number 7 is Reveal. So you may have gathered by this point in the video that I am a pretty big fan of Up. And I kind of see Reveal as kind of like its sister record or almost like a companion record. I think they're really, really similar. On Up, they sort of started, really referencing a lot of like 60s influence. But I think on this record, it's really a lot more pronounced. Joe talked about the Beach Boys, but I hear other stuff too, like The Association and all kinds of 60s pop groups you can hear kind of being referenced here. I think this is probably an easier listen, probably more immediate, but I think Up really kind of reveals itself more on multiple listens. And I think this one, even though it's maybe catchier and a little poppier, I think once you get it, it kind of is what it is. But I think a lot of the songs are really good. I love Imitation of Life. I think it's amazing. I think All the Way to Reno is great too. And I don't think any of it's really bad, but it's just not quite as good as Up for me.
Okay, now we get to me. Number 7, Murmur. This is the album I referenced in the beginning. And Radio Free Europe is the song. I heard that on the radio or, I don't know, somewhere. Loved it. Think it's fantastic. Listened to the rest of the album. I didn't get it back then. I get a little bit more now. Radio Free Europe is still an awesome song, but I think this album is pretty darn good. You really get that jangliness. Stipe's a little hard to hear. It's kind of buried. The drums sound super 80s. Like they almost sound like Police style. A lot of like reverb on them. So the production definitely sounds very 80s. Like you can definitely pinpoint when it came out. And it kind of it reminds me of like the Smiths a little bit with the jangliness and kind of the big upfront bass, which I like. I think it all sounds great. I think all the songs are good. I think Pilgrimage and Laughing, pretty much the whole first half is excellent. Catapult's good. And then kind of it fades a little bit on side 2, but I think there's enough really strong songs here to make it one of the better R.E.M. albums. I know it's number 7, but that's still pretty good. I think I gave it 4 stars. It didn't make my 83 list, but it was, pretty much all of these albums from R.E.M. from here on out are like in the top 10 or 15 of every year that they come out. They just never, I didn't fall in love with any of the albums. I like them, I appreciate them, love some of the songs, but just never quite connected, I think, with Michael Stipe in particular. But I think Murmur is real good, so it's number 7.
All right, my number 7 is Fables of the Reconstruction. Pretty drastic evolution here in the third album. They did get a much different feel right away. With like that more surreal gothic texture. Album's got a cool, like ominous Southern folk element to it. Like you're traveling in like a ghostly like pickup truck kind of. It's pretty cool. And it is kind of like their first, it's not over the top, but it is getting like, at least in the message and the theme, like a little bit preachy. Like he's really starting to get on his soapbox a little bit. The songs are done in a more folk nature where it's more storytelling and, kind of just like passerby. But yeah, amping up the political criticism a little bit, which they'll kind of do for a little bit. A lot of like down-tempo, moody songs, really in the trenches with like a song like Old Man Kinsey. It's darker, much thicker too. Like it doesn't have that thin, almost like danceable first, like of the first 2 albums. This one's thick. I'm not crazy about the mix at times. I kind of miss, like Joe was saying, like that wide open Smith style jangly guitars. So like heavenly at times. This one is a little muddier. The low end is pushed to the front. And the bass itself is much lower and deeper and thicker and richer. I don't know if it's just on the song Auctioneer. It stands out the most to me, but that's the one that like the mix is just kind of off. It ends up kind of sounding like noise rock. A lot of what Peter Buck's doing just gets lost in the shuffle, but those are small critiques. I think this album's great, especially the approach, just kind of this cool Southern ghostly rock element to it. So Fables of the Reconstruction, number 7.
All right. My number 6 is Fables of the Reconstruction. And I believe on my initial list, I had this a lot lower. I think it was maybe 11 or something like that. And I believe I said that it was the worst of their IRS albums. And obviously now I have it as the second best of their IRS albums. I think I just was not getting the kind of darkness of it, and now that's really kind of connecting with me more. I like it. It's kind of cool. They don't really change too much of what they're doing from the first two albums, except for the guitar tone's a little different, and it creates an entirely different atmosphere and mood to the record, which is really cool. I love Green Grow the Rushes and Wendell G. I think those are probably my two favorite songs, but yeah, I just think this one's grown on me a lot since the first time I did the list. Number 6, Fables.
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed when I saw that. As far down as it was, Jason, I unsubscribed from the channel after that. Number 6 for me is going to be Out of Time. And I get what you guys are saying, but I don't think it's not really a bridge. It's like a detour into like whatever they wanted to do. I think at that point, it is very eccentric. I totally get the sequencing is just bizarre, but I like Radio Song. I love Losing My Religion, Low, Near Wild Heaven. I think are all strong. And then it gets weird because Endgame is pretty, but it's this instrumental. It just doesn't go there. Like it shouldn't be there. Then you get Shiny Happy People, which is great. And then you get basically a throwaway in Belong, probably one of my least favorite R.E.M. songs. And then it kind of picks up again with Half a World Away and Texarkana and Country Feedback and Me and Honey. So I think in general, it's pretty strong. I like all the songs I just mentioned. I don't really know why I have it number 6 now that I'm looking at this track list. I'm like, what? Maybe it's just like Ramser said, it's just the sort of disjointedness of it all. It has no coherence. There's no continuity in it. It's just a collection of good songs. And maybe it's a little too superficial. There's not, other than Losing My Religion, I don't think there's that like socially conscious sort of extra deep Michael Stipe lyrics on here. It's a little maybe on the surface, a little shiny, but that being said, I still think it's, it's a 4-star album for me. 91, tough year for them to break through, tons of stuff ahead of them on my top 5 list that year. But I think it's a good album and a bunch of great songs, just maybe a little all over the place.
All right. My number 6 is one that has slowly grown on me through time. I used to not like it very much at all, but especially now doing this within the context of R.E.M., I kind of think or like to think that I understand what they were going for here, which is kind of like a little bit tongue-in-cheek and almost making fun of them, not making fun of themselves, maybe a little bit, but also making fun. Making fun's not the wrong word. Whatever. Maybe being a little bit coy and tongue-in-cheek and commenting on the sound around them. I'm going with Monster at number 6. I think it was Peter Buck, but I'm not sure. But one of them called it our big dumb rock album, which I think makes kind of total sense. They really are playing it out like this glam rock, kind of posing and posturing like slacker Gen X 90s rock sound. You can kind of just picture like all the cool over the top cashing in on the culture of like MTV's Hip Extreme logos and stuff coming in. They're really like, I like the guitar tone on here. It doesn't bother me at all. I know Jason had a big problem with it. I think Peter Buck sounds great, turned up to 11, all really distorted. And, I think Michael Stipe is having a lot of fun on this album, which doesn't necessarily always come across. Fun isn't always the first thing you think of when you think of Michael Stipe, but I kind of get it on here. I think pretty much all of the songs are really good. I think the end, it kind of tapers off a little bit after I Took Your Name, but I like that song a lot. I like Tongue, Bang and Blame, Strange Currencies is great, Crush with Eyeliner. I think King of Comedy is really different and cool and a really nice like artistic statement. So yeah, I think this album's great, and obviously a great lead-off track with What's the Frequency, Kenneth. So I got it pretty high at number 6, Monster.
My number 5 is Cram's least favorite R.E.M. album, Collapse Into Now. And I just think this is the perfect album for them to go out on. Accelerate really had them re-energized, and they took that energy and harnessed it and turned it into really good songs and a great album. I think this one's a grower. The more I listen to it, the more I like it. I especially like the ballads on it. Uberlin and Oh My Heart, I think, are 2 of their best songs. Mine Smell Like Honey is really good. I just like the whole thing, really, and I think it's a great late period record for them.
Is that going to make your top 5 in 2012, 2011?
No.
Okay. So much for that. I guess you don't like it that much. My number 5 is going to be Reckoning. And yeah, it is kind of like Murmur Part 2. And yeah, I do think it's just slightly better. It's pretty much the same. I think South Central Rain is great. One of my favorite R.E.M songs. And the jangle, that jangle is like turned up to 11. If you switched Morrissey and Michael Stipe, you might not be able to tell the difference between them and the Smiths at this point. Even the bass lines are super melodic, and it's just dead ringer. Even the tone sounds like Mar. So I like that sound. That's a great sound. I think they probably developed simultaneously. And I really like the kind of faster, more upbeat stuff. Harper Coat, Seven Chinese Brothers, Pretty Persuasion. I don't love Camera. I think that's really the only song I don't like on here. I think Don't Go Back to Rockville's a pretty darn good song as well. And I think it's just maybe missing like that killer radio cut. Might be one of their most consistently good albums, but it's another 4-star album. They're pretty much all 4 stars at this point. But yeah, Reckoning. I'd never heard this one before either. I didn't know it existed. Completely escaped my knowledge. So this is a cool one to hear and sort of listen to a bunch and get a nice picture of what they were doing in 1984.
I also got Reckoning at number 5. And yeah, it's, kind of the sequel to Murmur. I think, obviously I've got Murmur ahead of it, but it's close. I think much like Murmur, it's just not quite as light and airy. I think it's a bit thicker and a bit denser and darker, but at the same time, no one is doing the jangliness like they are. Doesn't quite have the first charm, or the charm is the first one. I think they're starting to get a little bit like more pensive with the lyrics, just by a little bit, like a song like Camera, which I'm also not crazy about. Obviously with Fables, they'll go more down that route, but everything kind of just like sinks into the beats a little bit more than on Murmur. Murmur's very just like everything kind of just skims the surface and is very flighty and tiptoey and bounces off like the downbeats and skims the surface. And yeah, I think this one is just a little bit more not quite as fun or like danceable. Like Joe was talking about that early sound, very 80s and almost sounding like the Smiths. I even hear like a little bit of like really early U2 at times. I kind of feel like their first few records are like they're the American Shy U2 in a weird way. But yeah, I think this is a great album, and really I'm just nitpicking from here on out, except for my top 2, which I think are 5-star masterpieces. These are all, great albums. So I've got Reckoning at number 5.
All right, my number 4, it was my number 2 last time I did my list. It's dropped a tiny bit, but I still really, really like it. I've got Up. Had to lower it a little bit so that Joe didn't have a brain hemorrhage or something. This is the first one without Bill Berry, and I do think they feel a little bit lost on this one, like they're just kind of like searching around in the dark, but they're like accidentally stumbling into all of these great ideas. I think maybe being forced to improvise and find solutions for not having Bill in the band anymore kind of worked in their favor. It kind of broke them out of this staleness that was developing on New Adventures. And I just think a lot of the songs are really cool. I like Suspicion a lot. It's got this like loungy kind of like outer space cocktail lounge type of thing happening, but I love the chords on it. I think Lotus is cool. Sad Professor, Why Not Smile? And I think At My Most Beautiful and Day Sleeper are the obvious standouts for most people, but I think those songs are great. And I think the whole thing just kind of unfolds slowly. All the songs develop a kind of a slow pace. They don't really give away the trick until maybe the last quarter of the song, when they may go somewhere a little unexpected. And I think that's really cool. I like the way that the album operates in that way. So Up, I think, is really underrated. Number 4.
My number 4 is going to be Green. And this is, I guess, their ascension to pop radio gods, I guess. I don't know exactly when that happened, but this seems to be their kind of big breakout into, I mean, not into pop radio, but sort of out of that college rock sort of sound. You have major key pop on this, which I don't think they were really doing before that, with Stand and Pop Song 89. You still get the rock side with something like Orange Crush. So they can still rock. I don't know if they still have that kind of righteous anger that they were throwing around. There's definitely some environmental consciousness a lot on this album, but it doesn't sound quite as angry and sort of us against the world. There's a ton of different instruments and sounds. I think they're really dabbling in a lot of different kind of things, but it's still cohesive. It's not quite like Out of Time where it's like just way too much. There's a lot of mandolin and stuff on this one. There's some pedal steel guitar and some other cello and maybe some strings on here too, I think. It's different. I like it. I don't know if this is my favorite style of R.E.M. I think I like sort of the angry, brooding. But I think on this one that they proved pretty much that they can do the pop stuff, the lighter fare, as well as the other stuff. So it's a good album, real good album. Almost cracked in 88. It was a weak year, but just missed again. Another 4-star album. They know how to write an album. They just never quite get over the hump for me.
All right, I'm in 4.5 star territory, almost a masterpiece. For me at number 4 is Automatic for the People. I think it's kind of a common number 1, and I understand it's got a lot of the big hits, and I think the hits are great, but none of these hits like Man on the Moon or Everybody Hurts or Drive really are close to my favorite R.E.M. songs. But the reason why this album is so good is I think the songwriting craft is just kind of there. It's got a very mainstream appeal to it because I think it almost plays more like a singer-songwriter album to me at times. Like, it's very much Michael Stipe's show, I think. It's very passionate. I don't think he's over singing ever, but he's singing almost melodramatically and big on everything. And it sounds great. It probably could use a little bit more rock, but I'm really nitpicking here. I think it's just like, it's different because I think everything else that they've ever done is really reflective and in the moment. And this one is almost like sentimental in nature for a lot of the tracks. And I think it's great. I really like every song on this album, probably except for Star Me Kitten, but it's a great album. Automatic for the People was a contender in a loaded 92 for me, but couldn't get in there. But yeah, my 4th favorite R.E.M. album, Automatic for the People.
That is my number 3, Automatic for the People. And I think coming after Out of Time, it's just so focused and kind of maybe a little too focused. Like you said, it could use maybe a little more, maybe a rock song or two on there. But I think it works really well. The songs are really great. I think it could use a resequencing as well, especially at the beginning. My least favorite song on the whole record is Drive. And it's always a bummer when a record opens with your least favorite track. But I think it's great. Several of these songs made my top 10. And a couple more were in the running. So just a really good focused record after one of the least focused records of all time.
My number 3 is going to be Fables of the Reconstruction. Another one. This is my number 6 in 85. It probably could have made my top 5 list. And it might now because I have even more appreciation for it after listening to it a bunch of times for this. I love sort of the darkness, the gothic South, completely, it's not like anything they did before. It's not like anything they did after. It's the closest thing they have to like a concept album. And yeah, it's a little muddy, but I love how upfront the bass is. I think the bass sounds awesome. Something like Feeling Gravity's Pull, just really dark and sort of haunting. The guitar's a little heavier, definitely loses that jangly college rockness. There's no, Driver 8 kind of hints at what they can do. It's catchy, but still, minor key, with sort of, maybe hints at what they will do later with some of their big hits. I feel like this is where they really start to bring in the backup vocals, and I think that kind of comes to the forefront. And I think they do it really well all over this album. And I think it's just a really cool kind of striking, it really brings you into the mood really well. I think the whole album is like awash in this kind of dark menace sort of, it's kind of right in the title, Fables of the Reconstruction. So it's kind of taking you back to a time of turmoil and, darkness in America. And I think they just do it really well. It's really cool. I like the banjo on Wendell G, and sort of it's not Southern rock, like there's no explicit Southern rock, but it definitely kind of takes you to that world, that area, without being, it's not Leonard Skinner or anything like that, but it's sort of a different side of the South. I think it's great. I think it sounds ahead of its time as far as the guitar tone. It's almost alternative, grungy, which I kind of like. This was 85, so it's kind of, a detour into this world. They never really do it again, anything like this, but I really like it. I think it's a really kind of cool, interesting album. So number 3, Fables of the Reconstruction.
Very well said. Nice little review. My number 3 is going to be Murmur. Yeah, it's awesome. I love its reputation. It's like an early underground, nerdy art school dance rock party. But it's also like, it's intellectual because that's who they are. They're not going to be writing, it's got like this really relentless, weird, enigmatic positivity to it, but it's like not cheerful. Like you wouldn't say it's cheerful album, but it's great. And this album and my numbers 1 and 2, we're talking about Out of Time being a great illustration of terrible sequencing and navigating you through. This album and the other two, I think, do an exceptional job of this. Right when you need like a little bit of like a punch break or a breather from the fun stuff, you get like Perfect Circle, and then Catapult on side 2 brings you back right up. And Catapult just like is a really cool song. I want to talk about it a little bit because it missed my top 10, but it's a great simple song that just kind of illustrates their style and their really good sense of just like time and space in a song. Like they have this big open chorus where he just says catapult, and like that high octave, I don't know if it's a mandolin or just the guitar, comes in and just does the work for him. It's great restraint for an early band to just kind of produce these songs this way. I love all of the songs on here. I think the sequencing is great, especially towards the end, like with We Walk and West of the Fields really leaves you like wanting the next R.E.M. album. You do like it. The whole album flies by. You're in a really good place, like how you react to the album. Then you're like, oh man, I can't wait for the next R.E.M. album. It's great. Pilgrimage, Laughing, Talk About the Passion, Radio Free Europe. All of these songs are great. It is a really great album. I do agree with Jason where he says like their songwriting will get better. It'll get different for sure. But overall, I think their voice and the character of the band will come out later. But yeah, this is an amazing debut. Number 3 on my list, Murmur.
Right, my number 2, it is Life's Rich Pageant. I mean, if you look at my list, each one getting a little better here at the beginning of their career. I had Murmur at 11, Reckoning at 8, Fables at 6. And this is, I think, the first huge leap they take. I think there are probably a half dozen songs on this record that I like more than anything from the first 3 records. I think the songwriting just really, really gets a lot better on this record. These Days, Falls on Me, I think is awesome. Cuyahoga, I Believe, Superman, Another Step Forward. I don't see a huge ton of difference between the IRS albums. I think they're all sort of kind of relatively similar with some differences. I think the guitar tone on Fables is especially different than some of the other records, but I just think the songwriting here is really, really strong. And the melodies are really catchy. Joe mentioned the Mike Mills backing vocals really starting to build up on Fables, but I think they really go to another level here as well, which I think that's kind of the band's secret weapon is Mike Mills backing vocals. He's fantastic, really does a lot of great stuff, especially on the choruses when he's doing he's not doing just simple harmony. He's often singing like counter melodies and call and response type stuff. So yeah, it's a great record. Life's Rich Pageant, number 2.
Where was that last time on your list?
Don't remember. It was definitely a good bit lower. I'll have to look and see, check the tapes, but it's climbed quite a bit.
Interesting. I don't hear it, but my number 2 is Document. This is like a complete 180 from Fables as far as the production goes. It is so bright and big and loud. There's lots of acoustic guitar. I guess is this the album where they kind of switch from electric to acoustic as sort of their lead instrument? I think it might be, because you don't really have that. You have that electric jangly guitar, but they really get into the acoustic stuff. This is really, I think, the first album where they sound like R.E.M. that most people know them of. This is where most of their radio hits start to come from. This one has The One I Love and It's the End of the World as We Know It. I think it's a little funkier, maybe a little new wave inspiration on this one. Lots of variation, experimentation. Strange, which is a cover, but it's the closest thing they do to like actual Southern rock. And it's sort of like a unique, kind of cool little thing that they do. I like It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine. I think it's a fun song, but you also have some real sort of like, I don't know if they're socially conscious, but they're definitely sort of the angry young man, down with the government kind of stuff. So you get the politics on something like Finest Work Song, Welcome to the Occupation, Exhuming McCarthy. And sort of that anger really works for me. I like the fieriness that they have on this album. I think they just sound really good. Some of those, not their biggest hits, but Finest Work Song, that whole first 7 songs of the album is just as good as it gets for them, pretty much. I don't like Lightning Hopkins much, but pretty much everything else is just excellent stuff. Big, loud, just angry, conscious, just great stuff. Strong 4.5 stars for Document, number 2.
My number 2 is Green. It is my favorite album of 1988. I give it a full 5 out of 5 stars. I think it is a masterpiece. Jason typically hates when albums kind of, do the half side idea versus the other half side idea. This one does the air side versus the metal side. And I think it works brilliantly. This album's like a big, ironic play on some politics and where rock radio's at. And they went in with a mindset of wanting to make an R.E.M. album with songs that didn't sound like R.E.M. So they wrote primarily wannabe pop rock songs. I think they said that were all in major keys, very chord driven. Michael Stipe's kind of goofy and bouncy at times, especially in a song like Stand. It's very interesting what he's doing with his cadence in this album. I think it's great. First half, pop song 89, Get Up, You Are the Everything, Stand, World Leader, Pretend, Wrong Child, Awesome. And then Orange Crush and Turn You Inside Out come in with just so much attitude, kind of enough dicking around. Here we go. It's awesome. I love this album. I love the cover of the album and how it's orange, but apparently if you blink, it leaves a green image in your eye or whatever in your retina. So that's why it's called Green. Really cool. I love this album. I think it's great. And I think it's just really a great part of their discography of how talented they are to collectively just kind of switch modes, flex their muscle of talent, and just we can do right now kind of whatever we want. And they do flawlessly on Green. So that is my number 2.
And that is my number 1. It was my number 1 before, still is my number 1. Scott Litt's back from producing Document, but it kind of sounds similar to Document. It does have sort of the same production style, but it's reined in a lot here. Not quite as massive sounding, and it doesn't really overwhelm the songs as it occasionally does on Document. The songs are really melodic, really immediate, catchy. I think sometimes people view this as, it's their first record on a major label. Maybe there was a tendency at the time to view it as kind of selling out with a big catchy single like Stand, but I don't think that's really the case at all. And I think that perception has kind of faded away as well. They're still doing acoustic tracks with mandolin. They're still being political in the lyrics. They're still being R.E.M. through and through. Pretty much every song on this album works really, really well.
Okay, my number one, Automatic for the People, and I do admit that this is not what I thought it was going to be. Not when I started making this list, I had it like number 8 because I just didn't get it. I'd always not gotten it. It's just one of those classic albums I heard. My mom had it on record, and I listened to it, and I was like, I don't really like this. So I guess I just didn't like it that much. I listened to it once, and I was like, okay, it's pretty good, but there's still some problems. And I listened a couple more times, and then listened to it today, and I was just, I don't know, blown away this time. Even Drive, which I didn't love at first, and Everybody Hurts, I kind of didn't get them quite, but I now love Drive. I love the way it just builds the whole time and never breaks. There's no chorus where it kind of comes down. And I love the orchestration from John Paul Jones. He does a couple tracks on here. I think they all sound excellent. I really like Everybody Hurts after not liking it until like today. Now I love it. It is in Walt's time, so that might be it. But it's just one of those throwbacks. It's very 60s, 50s. It's like Earth Angel. But it just has this really cool way that it works. It takes upon the influences and turns it into something else. And I don't know. I guess I had a problem with Michael Stipe's voice maybe, or just something about him. I never quite got him, but I think on this album, I finally kind of get him. I think Night Swimming's amazing. Maybe his best lyrics. Find the River is great too. I've always liked Man on the Moon. And I think even something like Ignore Land, which is really sonically, it's almost hard rock. I think it's great. Other than New Orleans instrumental number 1, which instrumental tracks, I don't really get that one, especially where it comes in. But other than that, I think the whole album just is excellent. It's all over the place, lots of mandolin, and it has kind of like this impending doom, menace, just like darkness again. Kind of like Fables of the Reconstruction, but a little less Southern. It's more sort of, I don't know, alternative menace and doom instead of Southern menace and doom. But I think it's just really good, really pretty, great poetry. And number 1, it wasn't number 1 until today, but I think I got this one right.
All right. 3 different winners among our listography panelists. It is all good selections. My number 1 is Document by a hair. I flip-flopped this with Green quite a bit, but kind of decided that I liked it just a little bit more than Green when we were going through albums of the year. It's, filled with their most like righteous political strife. It is in your face, kind of a little bit maybe what they were doing in Life's Rich Pageant. And then they're just like, all right, let's go all in, not just with the lyrics and, with what the album's going to be about, but let's go in with the sound. And Jason said it, the drums are the star of the show on this album. It's almost like, it's not metal, but this whole album has like this awesome, like sharp, stinging, metallic like sound to it. It's full of urgency and just like this pulse that doesn't really quit, that I kind of even get on like some of the more like laid back, goofier tracks, like Exhuming McCarthy or Disturbing Herrenhaus. It's awesome, or It's at the End of the World as We Know It. Everything sounds like really important. Like you really need to hear what they have to say on this album. Starts off like really fast and aggressive with not too fast with Finest Work song, but then it really picks it up as a nice 1-2 punch. Welcome to the Occupation after that. The One I Love is great. I think it ends well. I just think it's a great statement album where, it's hard for me to pinpoint kind of why it's my favorite, but I just love the propulsive nature of it, how the drums are just kicking and everyone's feeding off each other. I think it's like probably the songs that probably would come across as the most live, energetic live. I've never seen them live, really unhappy about that, but I would love to hear if there any album you could just hear live by R.E.M. straight through, I'd want it to be this one. So it is my favorite. Number 1, Document. It lost narrowly in Albums of the Year 87 for me, but my number 1.
All right, so final thoughts before we go.
I think I didn't like R.E.M. as much as I thought I did. Mostly, and it always comes down to this, and it's probably a character flaw on my part. because the critics love them so much, kind of rebel against that whole idea. Like all of these albums are like 5-star classics if you read the reviews and stuff like that. And I never quite got that. I think they're all good, but I guess I don't hear sort of the all-time greatness in most of them. I can hear it in some of them. Overall, I just felt like I was missing something. But I pretty much get it now. I think they're pretty darn good. Not quite as good as everyone thinks, maybe, but I still think they're great.
To be fair, you said your 9th favorite REM album was a 4-star album, so...
I mean, they're all good. I just don't hear like that all-time, they're not anywhere near my favorite 70s artists or anything like that. I think Automatic for the People, probably 5 stars, but 92, I had like 6 5-star albums, so that was close. I mean, they're all good. I just don't, you read some of these reviews and some of these all-time lists, and there's just like 12 REM albums on them, and I don't quite get that. I don't think they're perfect. I think they've got plenty of flaws, but I think as a band, I think I've grown in appreciation and kind of seen how good they were for such an extended period of time, which is never easy. But they had a really great 10-year run, and even in their sort of lulls and dips and valleys, I still think they're pretty good, except for maybe some 90s issues, as you'll have.
I love them, obviously. Have loved them for a long time. Have never done this where I've listened to them straight through. And even though they didn't really change anywhere in my all-time, list, it's really remarkable doing this. Just like, for me, how consistent they are. Like, there are very few moments or songs on albums where I'm just like, this is not good. They are like, their valleys are better than most people's like mid-level. So I think they're remarkably consistent in that regard.
Yeah, even though my list changed a lot, my feelings about them are about the same where they were. I think they're a very consistent, good band. Probably not one of my favorite bands ever, but they don't have a lot of low points. Just about the entirety of their catalog is sitting right at about a 3.5, with a few that are a little lower, a few that are a little higher, but that's pretty much where they sit with most of their stuff for me. All right, everybody, let us know how you rank them down below, what you think of our list. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check down in the description for links to all of our social media accounts. And we will see you tomorrow for our top 10 favorite REM songs.